I'm going to go to questions, or to invite people to ask questions in a moment. And maybe just very briefly, I know there have been a lot of questions coming in writing, and I'm also just having a look here in terms of who has been raising hands to ask questions, and I want to make sure that people have microphone availability as well. So bear with us while we go through all of that process. There's a couple of limitations potentially as to who might be able to come in and ask questions, but I'll be able to see that from here, so I hope to bring in as many people as possible with a microphone. Before I go to just ask for individual comments or questions, just a couple of things that came up, I think, on the chat so far, or on the questions, which are more comments that I might just acknowledge very briefly. I see Louise Weir had made a point about Horizon 2020 project on generation renewal and on gender balance, which might helpfully inform the process as we go through the development of the plan. So thanks very much for that, Louise. We'll take that as a comment for the moment, but if you could follow up by giving details again in the submission to the email address or by post as already outlined, that'd be very helpful. I see a comment again. I'm going to take a comment from Michael O'Donovan, who has essentially said that we should be abolishing the nitrates derogation. So look, Michael, we'll note that comment. And again, if you could follow up and flesh out and maybe expand on that a little for us as well as part of your own submission, that'd be very much appreciated. And I think there was a comment also there from Michael Biggins, just in terms of Fran's presentation on the direct payments modelling, to the effect that it looked like CRISS was effectively a foregone conclusion according to the presentation. I think on that one, and Fran, if you want to come back on that briefly, you're welcome to, but I think really on that one, what we're trying to do here is look at all of the options that are available here in terms of what has been agreed as part of the overall agreement on cap reform. There are a number of complexities around this in terms of how we can combine things, but also what we're required to do under the regulations. And one of those things is, for instance, that there is a mandatory requirement for 10% of the direct payment ceiling to be made in the form of redistributed payment from larger farmers to smaller and medium-sized farmers. That is a mandatory provision in the draft regulations, which hopefully the Parliament will pass in the autumn. But there is a derogation there for member states to not go to a full 10% of redistribution if their redistribution needs can be met by other measures within Pillar 1, within the direct payment structure. So we have to look there from a member state point of view. We have to look at what the structure of our direct payment system is, and if there is a need for redistribution that we've identified in our SWOT and needs analysis, we need to demonstrate that we're either meeting that through the existing measures in Pillar 1 or through the additional measure of a CRISS payment. And that's why we're modelling it. That's why we've looked at different options, as Fran has outlined, in terms, for instance, of 5% or a 10% CRISS. And we do have to do that in order to inform you, because they are options. And in fact, like I say, indeed a mandatory provision within the regulations in relation to redistribution. So we do have to acknowledge that, but we want to look at what the impacts of that would be, and we want to get your feedback also on that before making a decision, and also evaluate our own needs in terms of redistribution as part of our own analysis. So not a foregone conclusion as such, but we do need to incorporate it into the modelling exercise and the reflections that we're doing as far as making sure that we have essentially a fair system, which also allows for payments to be made to smaller and medium-sized farmers. So there were just a few of the comments I think that have come in over the course of the first part of the proceeding. So again, thank you very much for those folks, and if you wouldn't mind, please do follow up in terms of your submissions. I'm going to go to, if I can, and just bear with me for a second, because I'm kind of simultaneously looking at who has microphone availability here, and I'd like to start with I think Rosemary McDonough, I think, has a microphone and has made a comment around the cap on number of suckler animals, and also in relation to national co-financing. Now, Rosemary, I know that you made, I think, similar comments last night, but we didn't get a chance to bring you in on microphone. So if you have your microphone available there, you might unmute that, and you could put your point or put your question, and we'll come back with a response on that. So if I could start with that. Are you able to hear us okay, Rosemary, or are you having any trouble getting in on the microphone? I think Rosemary may be having difficulty there.
Rosemary is unmuted, Paul, so she should be able to open up.
Yeah, not coming through though, Tom. So I might come back to Rosemary. There may be an issue there in terms of connection there to the microphone. So I'll come back to that if that's okay. I'm going to go to, if I can, to Brendan
Sorry,
Golden.
Paul. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Can you hear me now?
Sorry,
Hello?
Rosemary, is that you? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Hi. Hello. How are you? Sorry, I was just
Good.
waiting to be unmuted there by yourselves. Yes. So basically, thank you, and thank you for taking my question. And I suppose it is along the lines of, you know, it has been talked about how best to achieve the economic, environmental and social objectives of the new CAP for 2023 to 2027. But really, can I put it to you that the economic implications for farm family income and the economic sustainability of rural Ireland are the greatest challenge of all in this CAP proposal, and bring the most fear to farm families. Now, the direction of travel of this CAP reform has focused on environmental sustainability, with little or no consideration for the economic and social consequences for rural areas. And Ireland's grass-based production systems are producing public goods, including protection of the environment and biodiversity. So farmers contribute to wider societal sustainability, particularly where they are located in marginal or economically disadvantaged areas, where their presence is vital to the social fabric and cultural capital of our country, Ireland. So, I mean, take for instance the suckler cow farming. This is an environmentally friendly way of farming in certain parts of Ireland, and indirectly supports schools, shops, agri-stores and many businesses in rural Ireland. So on the back of that, I just have a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions. I mean, can you confirm that there will be no cap on the suckler herd, and that farm family incomes, you know, from this cap will not be impacted, and that the budget for CAP will be set along with maximum co-financing from the Irish government? And I just should have said there that my name is Rosemary McDonough. I am the IFA National Chair of the Farm Business Committee, and I'm a farmer in County Galway. So thank you, Paul, and thank you to all your colleagues there from the department that have taken the time over the last 3 nights to put on the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Rosemary. I'll invite colleagues in a moment, possibly Maria Dunn might want to come in just to comment on your point around the cap on sucklers. But I might just come back more generally. I think in terms of your commentary there around economic and environmental sustainability, I think really the point here has to be made that we are trying to achieve a kind of a balance of economic and environmental and also social sustainability through the measures in the cap. And that is very much a requirement on foot of the agreement that we've had and on foot of the content of the regulations. And we are trying to straddle all 3 of those objectives. No sight has been lost of the economic sustainability piece of it, but there has been an increasing focus obviously on environmental sustainability. And that has been a feature of the cap over the last 10 years or more. In fact, in the current programme, you would have seen obviously the greening addition to the current framework was in response to societal pressures to introduce more environmentally friendly farming and introduce more environmental criteria into the allocation of payments. That process is ongoing, that evolution is continuing, and there is certainly a growing focus on the environmental sustainability of the cap and of farming. And it's something that we have to acknowledge, be conscious of, and it's something that also underpins, as you mentioned, the available EU budget. Because, you know, we protected the cap budget last time around, last year. In fact, we've had a small increase here in Ireland as a result of the negotiations last year. And the reason for that is because of the greater environmental lean, if you like, that's now in the cap and in the way that money is being spent. So there is that increasing pressure to have that environmental sustainability. Our budget has been secured on the basis that that is something that the cap has to achieve. And we therefore have to reflect that in our CAP strategic plan, which is why we're looking at things like eco schemes and increased environmental ambition in Pillar 2. That has to be done, I think, in terms of securing the budget, but securing the budget also means that we can ensure the economic sustainability of the sector as well, which means continuing to provide for income supports under Pillar 1 and also for the range of other measures that we have in Pillar 2. So the 2 essentially go hand in hand. You can't have that economic sustainability effectively without the environmental sustainability in place as well. And then just on the funding, I mean, we are very conscious of the fact we do want to maximise the national co-financing of the overall budget that's available to the CAP strategic plan. As I mentioned, the EU element of that has been agreed now as of late last year. We know what we're talking about there in terms of availability of EU funds. We still have to agree the detail of what would be available from a national co-financing position. But we are working on that at the moment. We have been doing so with our colleagues, for example, in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and the Minister is talking to his counterpart also there as well, Michael McGrath. And that process is ongoing, and we hope to conclude that very soon. It wasn't possible to include in the public consultation document specific financial allocations for that reason, because those discussions are ongoing, but we hope to conclude those soon and to add that detail to the profile of what we're doing in the strategic plan. So that's just on that point. I don't know, Maria, do you want to comment just very briefly on the Suckler cap? And I might just mention, I mean, there have been a number of other questions that I've seen coming in from people over the course of the evening. From Shirley Armitage, for instance, has made similar points. Francis Burke, Deirdre Foley, Frank Barrett also, and Brendan Golden as well. So a number of similar issues around the cap on Suckler numbers, the treatment of potentially young farmers having an exemption, a participation in the QA scheme as well in quality assurance has also been mentioned in terms of the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, and also issues I think raised around reference year as well, which Brendan Golden certainly referred to in his question. So Maria, maybe there's a few things there, but maybe you might just make some general comments just in terms of the direction of travel on the Suckler Carbon Efficiency if we can.
Okay, and Paul, I will try to be quick, not because I don't want to respond, but I want to make sure that you let all the contributors get a chance to speak. So look, you're correct. There is a proposed limit on the expansion or a cap on existing numbers with some margin proposed for participants in the Suckler Environmental Scheme. So at the moment, that is proposed. And the logic behind putting that in there was that environmental efficiency gains through the scheme should not be offset by increased numbers. But to be very clear, it's a proposed condition. It hasn't been agreed by anyone. It's proposed for discussion. And myself and Valerie here, who is the person responsible for beef policy within my division, we're here tonight and the last 2 nights, and we're noting all the comments that are coming in. And I'd also encourage you, along with that, to submit your opinions in a formal written submission. I might deal, Paul, if it's okay with you, very quickly with the board via QAS, because I see that's another one that's coming in on the comments there and appears to be causing a lot of discussion. I'd also say it's a proposed eligibility condition, not agreed with anyone yet, proposed for discussion. So it's proposed for the Suckler scheme, the dairy beef and the sheep scheme. Listen, both the beef and the sheep sectors, they're heavily export dependent. And it's an attempt to try to keep the routes to both the EU and third country markets to be able to keep them open and to maximise them. And quality assurance certification is now a prerequisite in many European markets and an increasing ask from all markets. In addition, the greater number of cattle and sheep farms that participate in QAS, the better our ability to demonstrate our sustainability credentials, both through tracking carbon footprint and capturing information on ecodiversity. So what it's about is trying to maintain markets and to collect data to support our sustainability credentials. And anyone who has been involved in the recent PGI application on the beef side or on the development of the Suckler brand or the grass-fed logo will know how key that data is. Now, there's interesting comments coming in there, and I fully appreciate the comments that are made. For example, there's a comment made there that perhaps it devalues the scheme by making it compulsory. Look, we're not making it compulsory, we're attaching it to schemes. But these are valid comments that are coming in. We're taking note of them. And again, I encourage you to make a submission. Valerie, do you want to come in on the reference schemes and also the flexibility for newer farmers on the Suckler scheme? And Paul, if it's okay, there was a couple of questions on the dairy beef as well that Conor might address.
Thanks, Maria. Evening, everybody. So I'm just going to cover off some points around, as Maria said, the reference period. Will be applied. Now, this is something that we're still discussing internally, and we've gotten some really good feedback from the last couple of sessions on it, and it's something we're interested in views on. So at the moment, the thinking is from our perspective to look at maybe taking an average of a number of years, or as it was suggested last evening, and it's something we're considering now as well, maybe giving farmers a choice from a range of a number of recent years in terms of the reference period. And the reason we're looking at it that way is because we're aware, obviously, that people may have reduced temporarily because perhaps they participated in beam, or they had temporary TB restrictions, or for any other reason that they temporarily had to stop. So it's just to make allowances for that. Just in terms of new entrants and how they'll be handled, we know we have to look at them differently, both in the context of the reference period applied and in giving them capacity to build their herd too. So in the context of the limit around the increase in production. So those are two things that we're discussing right now, and we're really welcome views on that from everybody here. Thanks very much. We've gotten some really useful feedback, and we have a lot to consider from the other two sessions too. So we really appreciate you taking the time to give us that. I might cover off, before I pass over to Conor, one or two other questions that came in just in relation to the Suckler scheme, if that's okay, just really quickly.
Yeah,
there was one question.
Yeah, if you could, Val. Yeah, sorry, Val. Yeah, if you could pick up on those couple of questions, and I might just invite another speaker, maybe, because I know one or two people had questions on the dairy beef welfare, so I might just give an opportunity to somebody to ask those before I pass back to Conor. So maybe if you wouldn't mind addressing those other couple of questions, and then I'll ask the speaker to come in. Thanks.
No problem, Paul. Thanks. So look, one of the questions that came in was, will farmers be rewarded for increase in genetic merit of their herd? So I just wanted to touch briefly on the economic rewards that have already been achieved or gained from increasing genetic merit so far. So just in terms of from data that ICBF have, just in terms of the economic rewards already achieved from increase in genetic merit, in terms of the replacement index, there's a variance between very lowly indexed and very highly indexed animals on the replacement index of €120. So what that means is, if you are selling a replacement heifer, a very highly indexed one could make up to €120 more profit than a very lowly indexed one. In terms of the terminal index, ICBF data have shown that since the index was established in 2003, genetic improvement in the terminal index has delivered an added value of 549 million to the sector, to farmers. And that equates to an additional value of €35 per finished animal per year. And I think an important thing to stress in relation to these gains is that they're permanent and they're cumulative. So what that means is, if we stop breeding programs today, which I'm obviously not suggesting we do, those benefits, not only will they not go away, but they'll continue to build over periods. So that's just a point I wanted to make around the gains that have been made already from genetic improvement, and that's what we're looking to build on in this scheme. There was one question actually on the sheep welfare scheme that I might just come in on really quickly, if that's okay, and I don't want to take up any more time. It was asked if there would be a support payment for purchasing a genotype ram factored in, as it's a requirement, and there will. Okay, so that's all of the questions I have so far covered off. So I'll hand back to you, Paul. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thanks for that, Val. Appreciate that. Before I went to Rosemary that summer, before Rosemary managed to make connection, I was going to go to Brendan Golden. I think I mentioned that earlier. Now, I know, Brendan, you had a couple of questions around the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme as well, which I think have probably been covered. But you had another couple of questions also on dairy beef welfare, which maybe I'll give you the opportunity to put right now, and then Conor O'Mahony from the department can come back just to answer a couple of the points that have come up on dairy beef welfare in that context. I think you also had a question around how Pillar 2 environmental expenditure might be used to reduce eco-scheme percentage below 25%. So if you wanted to maybe refer to that question, we can take that also. So Brendan, if you have, if you can unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Thanks, Paul, and good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Look, I welcome the clarifications there around the Suckler scheme, and I would have to say, after the week I've put in, I have to say absolutely no to capping of the Suckler herd, because it's ringing in my ears for the whole week. Again, I think we can work around a lot of the measures, and I look forward to doing that in the coming weeks. The big thing for me is in and around the financing and targeted payments for a lot of progressive commercial beef farmers, tillage farmers, sheep farmers. A lot of people, if I mention 85% convergence to them, they say a cut. If I mention eco scheme to them, they say a cut. If I mention CRISS to them, they say another cut. The only way I can see that we can keep and protect the viability of these farms is through targeted payments and strong funding. Now, the only way we can do that is through strong national funding of our Pillar 2. The co-financing is critical. There's a minimum level set there, which we all know. We may need to go higher. The ambition has to be there to deliver on these payments. The €300 for the suckler cow, the €30 for the O. And again, I know I asked in a question there, the dairy calf and the welfare measure that's in there, and asked around that being expanded to cover cattle rearing and cattle finishers, needs to be looked at as well, because we're really going to change the whole face of farming in this country with a lot of the proposals that's coming at this moment. Now, separately from those targeted funding, we have 1.5 billion in carbon tax money there. It has to deliver a meaningful environmental scheme, and that it's critical that that money is absolutely nailed down for that scheme. Again, just briefly, and I'll go back to it again, I do hope that we can get a positive outcome around the funding, because it's critical. Any farmer, if you're dependent on a big portion of your family farm income to keep afloat, these payments are critical. We don't want to create an environment where we have more and more farmers that are becoming unviable. The eco scheme in Pillar 1, I think that any farmer that provides 20% of his payment into that eco scheme should have the facility to get it back. And I think we should look at ways or measures to try and deliver that. Again, around CRISS and the analysis of the effects, I know you put up modelling there, and it's earlier, and it's impossible to put up a model for everyone, but really 5 hectares is not really relevant to most people. If you're making a big portion of your living, there's a difficulty in and around the 85%. There's a misnomer out there that it's all big farmers. There's a lot of small farmers down here in the west of Ireland, where I am as well, on small hectares of green ground, and that 85% is going to have a big effect on them as well. So across the board, again, going back to the targeted payments, they're going to be crucial for the viability of those farms going ahead. And I think I did ask in the question there, in and around using the environmental measures in Pillar 2, maybe to reduce the level of funding into that eco scheme, because it is a massive change. It's a huge portion of our single farm payments. That is money that we were getting already. It's not new money, and this is the big thing with this current cap. And I know you went out there and worked hard in Europe, but for everything that's coming at us, really, we needed more funding. It's a sad day when you have to take it out of one farmer's pocket to put it into another, and that's the difficulty around all of this. I don't want to take up the whole evening, because more people have questions to ask. And I should have said it more than Rosemary there earlier on. My name is Brendan Golden, IFA National Livestock Chairman. But I do hope we can do our best endeavours to try and deliver a positive outcome from everyone. I know it's not easy. The last 3 days have shown it's definitely not easy. The webinar has been difficult. I didn't think I'd need 2 devices to be able to watch it for a night, but look, I know it hasn't been easy from your side either, so look, well done on the 3 nights, and look forward to working with you in the coming weeks. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brendan. And look, I know we've had a couple of issues around the technology, but also the format, I suppose, of the webinar. What we try to do is, I suppose, combine the best of a few worlds in terms of trying to get as many people involved in the webinar as possible, but also making it as workable as possible as well, which is why we went originally with the submission of written questions, which, as I said, we will be taking on board and we will be holding on to, and we will be processing as well and making them available on the website. We wanted to get those written questions, but it's only been possible really to do, if you like, a proper interaction in terms of getting verbal questions from people over the last 2 nights. So I hope people can bear with us as we kind of work around or make the best of the technology that's available to us in these COVID times. I know it's been difficult for everybody trying to do things like this over the last while, but anyway, just on I know a lot of the comments you make, look, I think we take as comments and certainly follow up in terms of your submission as well. Just one particular point to pick up on maybe that I might mention was just, you know, appreciating the point around what you're saying on eco schemes and payments to farmers and what's happening there in terms of Pillar 1 payments. And I know, look, I know this is presented often as a deduction or as a cut in a payment for a farmer in terms of providing for eco scheme payments. But the overall rationale here is about achieving greater environmental benefit from our Pillar 1 payments. That is really the rationale here. And it's a kind of an evolution or a continuation of what happened with greening the last time around, where greening was incorporated into the CAP, obviously in the period from 14 to 20. We're going beyond that in terms of, if you like, incorporating the greening requirements into basic conditionality now, with getting additional environmental benefit from eco schemes in Pillar 1. So I know again that the language around this has been around a kind of a cut in payments, but in effect, you know, yes, people are making a contribution to an eco scheme fund, but people can be paid then obviously for participation in that eco scheme. And our intention here is to maximize participation in eco schemes by making them as simple as possible and as widely available as possible to farmers, so that people can avail of the payments that are available to them and contribute to that additional environmental ambition in Pillar 1, and that's what we try to do. On the second point, just in relation to that, around the Pillar 2 environmental expenditure versus eco schemes, there is an option there for member states to allow them, if they have very high expenditure on environmental measures in Pillar 2, to offset some of that expenditure against what they may do on eco schemes, and that is an option that's available to member states, and it is one that we have to have a look at in the context of putting the plan together. And again, we are interested in your views on that, and we will ask you to give us those in your submissions. And in fact, that will be the subject of a further question that we'll have later on as part of our poll to get people's views on that. So if it's okay, I'd like to move on if I can, unless colleagues wanted to come in on any particular point that Brendan mentioned there before I move on, if that's okay.
Paul, I'll just address Brendan's.
Sorry, Conor, yes.
No, so the point he raised in relation to the dairy calf welfare scheme, talk about developing a scheme to cover cattle rearing and a finishing scheme around reducing emissions. The scheme targets kind of there's two categories of measures in it. The young calf measure and the growing calf measure. The young calf measure targeting, I suppose, the quality of calf being born and improving the welfare of that. But the growing calf measure, that actually targets supports and actions over the lifetime of a dairy beef animal. So it targets payments and actions in between 0 and 1 year for 0 to 1 year olds, as well as 1 to 2 year olds. So it definitely does support store cattle production there. And in terms of a finishing scheme aimed at reducing emissions, whilst there's no this dairy beef welfare scheme isn't targeted specifically at reducing the age of slaughter, the consequence and one of the key benefits of it will be by improving animal welfare, you improve animal performance, animal health, and by virtue of that you will ultimately end up reducing the age of slaughter for these dairy beef calves, and that will have a positive effect on emissions. There's one other question just to finish off on the dairy calf welfare. Someone asked about DNA sampling to prove sire and dam, to verify, I beg your pardon, sire and dam. One of the actions is genotyping of calves born in dairy herds, and that can be done by either genotyping or doing a DNA-based registration, so registering your calf on the basis of a DNA sample. We have undertaken in the last few years sample pilots on developing DNA calf registration for calves, so that is an action that will be allowable in the that will be supported in the scheme. And the person asking that question also spoke about leaving increasing the age to 28 days for calves to go before they leave farm. That's kind of beyond the scope of the scheme as such, but I think in the last year or two, dairy farmers, to their credit, have held on to calves for that little bit longer, and that has been reflected in stronger calves being presented to markets and those calves achieving stronger prices. So just an example of the market in itself actually and farmer behaviour working positively. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Conor. I'm going to move on, if I can, just to take a few other questions that have been put on the chat, and maybe to invite people to put the questions to the group. I see Harold Kingston had a question in relation to active farmer, and it is something that has come up both in the context of webinars over the last couple of days, but also in questions that we've had around the approach to the strategic plan. So, Harold, I think active farmers was the primary focus of your question. So I was going to ask you to come in maybe and put your point there, please, if you can unmute your microphone. I'm not sure, Harold, if you can hear me okay, or I'm not sure.
You should be open there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay.
Is that you, Harold?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, that's me. Listen, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, on the genuine farmer, there's 3 points, and firstly on something you said just a while ago in response to an answer to Brendan Golden. Eco schemes are effectively a cut for 2 reasons. The first one is the fact that there will be a cost of compliance, and the second is that funds will be bled off in order to pay advisors and assessors in order to prove that we are being active. And obviously, I do know that the department wants to keep farmers active, as can be seen by the fact that you're having a consultation on CAP during August while everyone else is on holidays, including the Minister. But besides that, on active farmers, has any consideration been given to tackling the long-term use of leasing entitlements and the use of ConAcre, keeping funds away from active farmers and effectively into SOFAs? And there was mention earlier of the nitrates review also to do with, and specifically to do with active farmers. With so many investments like less equipment and extra slurry storage being made mandatory now, the chances of derogation dairy farmers like myself accessing TAMS or whatever it's going to be called now to improve water quality and climate action, they're becoming increasingly limited. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Harold. I might just use the opportunity maybe to bring in my colleague Thomas Harty just to, on the active farmer piece, just to give, I suppose, a flavour of what we're looking at here in terms of measurement of agricultural activity and what the regulations provide for, or in their draft form at least until they're finalised later in the year, around the scope there for, or the requirement for member states to have a definition of active farmers. So maybe Thomas, if you could come in on that. I might come back to you might comment if you want to, Thomas, on this issue of the long-term use of leasing entitlements. But I might also ask maybe Fran Moran to come in just around the area of entitlements and leasing of entitlements, on which we've had a few questions already, and I'll come back to the TAMS question in a moment. So maybe initially, Thomas, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, Harold, and maybe to also acknowledge that I think there's a number of other questions in a similar vein. I think Shirley Armitage there and Michael Fitzmaurice may have had a similar one. So maybe before addressing the scenarios you were talking about, maybe just to state first of all what we are proposing to do with active farmer in the new CAP. So it is about looking for a minimum level of agricultural activity from the farmer declaring the land. And what we are proposing is that, and I suppose predominantly here we're talking about grassland farmers, but we are looking to see that the person declaring the land is the one engaged in the agricultural activity, you know, taking the economic and agricultural risk. So I think, as I said before on this, that probably the best example is that a farmer declaring land, grassland, you know, we propose using our systems to check for livestock. In the absence of livestock, obviously it's legitimate, the farmer may be making hay or silage to sell, but in circumstances like that, we would probably engage with the farmer to look for confirmation of how they're maintaining the land and how they themselves are taking on the risk. So being direct, what we're getting at here or looking at is to ensure that it's not a neighbouring farmer is accessing the land or something like that. That the farmer themselves, we're rewarding the person who's engaged in the activity and taking on the economic risk. So that's our current thinking, and that's the proposal. I think where you're coming from, and I understand, you know, the idea is this the farmer having entitlements and leasing them out over a long period of time, and in effect holding all the cards as might be perceived, because they have the land and they have the entitlements. So as it stands, leasing of entitlements is there in the new cap, and as it stands, there's nothing, and maybe Fran might want to comment on this in a minute, but that it's not something that we have looked at, or more exactly, it's not something that we have given a detailed thought in terms of the active farmer. But leasing is going to be a possibility under the new cap. So if there were ideas people had around this area, because in fairness to some farmers, leasing out of entitlements is a valid thing they may need to do for a number of years until the family members coming back. So in practical terms, how it would operate, we'd be interested to hear any ideas you may have on it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. I was going to use maybe the opportunity. I know you mentioned about long-term leasing of entitlements there in your question, Harold, and there's been a couple of other entitlements-related questions that have come in over the course of the evening so far. So maybe Fran Moran, I know there was, for instance, questions around whether transfer or trading of entitlements might be able to continue in the future, and one or two other entitlements-related questions. Could you maybe pick up on those if you could?
Sure, absolutely, Paul, and good evening again, everybody. So yeah, there's quite a few questions in around this area. So first of all, around will there be trading of entitlements, leasing and so on in the future? And the answer there is yes, there will. And in much the same way that there is now. However, if you are thinking about leasing entitlements in or leasing entitlements out, you need to know that the value of those entitlements will change in the new cap, regardless of exactly what the allocations are and whether it's 25% eco scheme or 10% CRISS or whatever else percentages might end up at. It will be different than it is now. So make sure you build that flexibility into your contracts if you are going leasing in or out entitlements or selling either. There's a couple of questions about long-term leasing, short-term leasing, and will we be able to do one or the other, or we shouldn't be able to do one, or we shouldn't be able to do the other. And look, this is and it's wrapped up with the idea of you'll have seen several questions there around what are called armchair farmers. Look, this is a really complex area. If this was something that was easy to be sorted out, it would have been sorted out long ago before now. So any ideas that you might have, any fixed views that you might have, we would be delighted to hear them, absolutely delighted to hear them, and we'll be taking them on board and are reading your comments here the whole time this evening. For every one person who believes that nobody should be able to lease out entitlements for a longer period or a shorter serial short periods, there's somebody else who is doing that for a very legitimate and often in bereavement circumstances and so on as well. So this is not something that's particularly simple to do or to deal with. Quite a few people have asked about when will we know and how will we know what the value of our entitlements are, what's the range of entitlement values and so on. The truth is it's too early to tell you that. We won't have that information finally until all of the allocations are decided. And that's what we're here doing tonight, is asking you about your opinion on what way those allocations should go. But before the new cap starts, coincident with that, you will get a statement of entitlements that will tell you what the value of your entitlements are. We don't yet have a calculator on board for you to work this out for yourself as we would have done in the past, but that's because the decisions are not yet clear, so we can't provide that for you just yet. Do you want me to stay going, Paul? A few more there. Yeah, okay. So there were
please do. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there was that you mentioned earlier, someone had a question about the portrayal of CRISS as a foregone conclusion. Well, look, the idea of the modelling, as Paul had said earlier, is that what is the impact of doing this? This is something that was set as a mandatory measure. So of course we had to go and model that and see what that would look like. That was the idea of that modelling. I said at the start that it's a forecast, that's all it is, and it's not a foregone conclusion. So absolutely we would have had to do that. Convergence each year, yes, there will be convergence each year, and in equal steps to whatever the destination is. That must be a minimum of 85%. of the national average entitlement value by 2026. But that is a minimum, so it could go further depending on what decision is made around that. There was some questions there about no cut for a farmer's payment under 20,000 and capping all payments at 60,000. So in these things, we are bound by the regulations, and absolutely there are clear rules around this. We cannot impose a cap of 60,000. What we can do is impose a cap on the BIS payment only, so not including eco schemes or other direct payment interventions, of 100% over 100,000, an effective cap of 100,000. And in addition to that, we can reduce the BIS payment of somebody between 60 and 100,000 by up to 85%. And the effective cap then would be 66,000 on your BIS payment only. So that is the sole limit that we have, the sole flexibility that we have to cap payments. It's on BIS only. And the same thing, we don't have the option to say through the normal measures to say protect anybody on less than 20,000, which by the way is probably 2.5 times the average payment. So it's getting out there on the high side. Regional convergence. I know somebody had asked a question there on regional convergence, and is it too late and would it be modelled? So the regulation will allow for regional convergence to be brought in if that's what it decided, but frankly, it would be difficult to do. It's not something that Ireland has done before. There would be a requirement to justify why you would do that on socioeconomic grounds or agronomic grounds. And on top of that, convergence would still apply within each of those areas. And there would be limits on being able to transfer entitlements in and out of each of those areas. There would have to be separate national reserves and so on for each of those areas as well. So there would be a lot of admin burden for farmers and for us to implement something like that. There was also questions there on the forgotten farmers. That's another one that there were quite a few questions on. So the Minister has given a commitment that the question would be examined. It's a commitment in the programme for government as well. And I know he has spoken about it recently, just there where after the council where the cap was finally agreed. So, but it has not been decided yet what is the right thing to do there and what's the best method to use. So I don't have an update for you on exactly what would be done there, but that commitment still stands. I think that's probably all of the questions as far as I can see, Paul.
Yeah, that's great, Fran. I think that they were pretty much the questions come in across the entitlements and convergence piece, I think. Thanks for that. I'm just picking up again and just bring in one or two more questioners. I know Harold had mentioned earlier on about dairy access to TAMS, and I think I might just take the opportunity to bring in Alan Jago as well. I think Alan had a question there around dairy investment as well. I think you also had one or two other questions, Alan, I think around National Reserve as well, which maybe I might get Fran also to mention, but or to respond to. But can I bring in Alan, if you can unmute your microphone, maybe to pick up first on the TAMS and the National Reserve questions that you had, and we'll get a response to those.
Hi, Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks for letting me on, Paul, and look, thanks very much to all your team in the department there. And look, it's great to be able to see, well, not see, but hear the people behind, the proposals and the work they're putting into it, and they're all very knowledgeable and the work they're doing. But I suppose behind each and every one of the single farm payments there's also a farm family and a farmer behind that. And look, this cap will mean a cost to our own farm incomes, and this cap also means that we're all running faster, doing a lot more for a lot less. And look, there are just two comments to start. Look, two questions I have, Paul. The first one is regarding the National Reserve. Is there any mechanism going to be there for replenishing it going forward? Is it going to be once-off reserve at the beginning and dwindle out over the coming years? And the second question I have is regarding the dairy investment scheme in TAMS, and what is the thought process behind the exclusion of that at the moment? That scheme is very important to dairy farmers. a lot of modernising and upgrading of dairy facilities happened on the back of that, and a lot more is happening in the coming years, and this is really important for dairy farmers. None of us want to be singled out, and this certainly feels that dairy farmers are being singled out and I suppose being left aside here. So look, Paul, thanks very much for that.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I might just, first of all, maybe I know, Fran, you covered a number of questions there, but maybe just on the National Reserve piece, do you want to make a response on that?
Yeah, so unlike in the current CAP, where the National Reserve was a voluntary measure, you didn't have to run it every year. In the new CAP, it will be mandatory. So there will be a National Reserve in every year. And the primary focus of that National Reserve will be to allocate entitlements to new entrants to farming and young farmers, who, by the way, will be more or less the same definition as there is there now, under 40 and with your educational requirements fulfilled.
Okay, thanks, Fran. And then just on the dairy investment piece, on support for investments, that's come up a couple of times, I think, and I've seen one or two other references in the questions we've seen in writing. So maybe I think Owen O'Brien or John O'Neill, could one of you address that question from the guys on that topic, please?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, yes, Paul, I can address that. As regards dairy investments in TAMS, it is envisaged that dairy farmers would be, like any other sector, would be eligible for any investments in TAMS. There's been no decisions made as regards individual investments that will be available in the next TAMS scheme. There's been no decision made that dairy farmers or dairy investments wouldn't be included.
Okay, thanks for that, Owen. I just wanted to mention, just in passing, I know Mark Connors had sent in a question, and I had sent in a further point on the written submissions there. Mark, I know your question was in relation to regional convergence, which I think Fran covered in his response earlier on, so I hope that has addressed the question from your point of view. I wanted to make a reference then just to a few things. I know there's been a few other comments have come through on the written points that have been submitted as well, so just to make comment again, just we'll take these as comments and maybe ask people to follow up in terms of their own submissions to the process. So I know Michael Gleeson has made some comments, John Fitzpatrick, Michael O'Donovan also. Again, if you could follow up with submissions to through the channels that are identified in the consultation document. Thomas Holmes, I think, talking around financing, I think, which was already covered earlier on in one of the responses that I had on national co-financing. Dennis McGrath was on in relation to the sucklers, which I think has already been covered as well on the cap on sucklers. Raymond McLaughlin has been on a couple of points, I think, on community supported agriculture and a couple of other issues, which again I'd ask to follow up on if you like with your own submission. And again, thanks very much for those comments. Adrian Gallagher has also been on the quality assurance scheme provisions that we've included in one or two of the schemes there, which I think was covered earlier in responses, as were a couple of the points that Francie Gorman has made on the questions. Thomas Burke referred to the PGI application, so again, if you could follow up with your own submission on that. Margaret Keane had made a point around the National Monuments Service, which I think has been responded to directly on the chat by my colleague Karina Rowe, so if you could respond to us separately on that, Margaret, that would be appreciated. Again, a couple of others, Dennis McGrath referring to the cap on sucklers, which I think has already been covered in the responses that we've given so far. Edmund O'D, I think similarly. Patrick Hester on equine farming. Again, I would ask just to maybe follow up that with a formal submission to the process, if you wouldn't mind, please, Patrick, on that. A couple of other comments around armchair farmers and active farmer from Shirley Armitage and a couple of others, I think, which have already been covered in the response on the active farmer. Again, one or two points on the suckler issue from Jerry Loftus, also on the sheep welfare scheme from Adrian Gallagher, which I'd ask maybe to follow up with a submission on as well. And more recently there from Joe Sheridan, again asking to make a submission if you could. So look at, again, we are picking up on the comments, and we would be very appreciative if you could follow up those comments with further follow up from your point of view in terms of making submissions to us. I was going to just ask, before I go back to individuals for questions, there have been a couple of points that have been made on the list that we've seen so far in relation to conditionality around GAEC 2, for instance. A couple of specific questions around how that will operate. We did have a question last night around GAEC 8 as well, how that would be operated. And I think there's been a couple of other references to that in the questions that have come in this evening. So I might ask my colleague David Ryan. David, could you maybe just pick up on a couple of points that people have asked around both GAEC 2 and GAEC 8, please?
Yeah, Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Good, thanks, Paul. Yeah, a number of questions have come in, Paul, I suppose, around GAEC 2. I suppose it's a new GAEC, so it's the questions we've been asked is, how will GAEC 2 operate in practice? For example, will peatland and wetland be digitally mapped? Can you explain GAEC 2 and how it will operate? So they're the type of questions. So as I said, it's a new measure. It's most of the previous GAECs, you know, have rolled over, while this is a new measure. It aims at protecting peatlands and wetlands. I suppose why is it being introduced? I suppose the fact that it's recognised that there's large quantities of carbon that are stored in peatlands and wetlands, so they're really carbon sinks, and some agricultural practices have a negative impact on these soils and cause the release of carbon. So that's, I suppose, the background to why it's been brought in. I suppose just to make a note that in terms of what we're looking at, you know, agricultural areas only. In Ireland, I suppose we have large areas of peatland outside of agriculture that are controlled by the likes of Bord Mona, etc. So we're not looking at that in this context, in the context of GAEC 2. To say, look, we haven't made any definitions, or the areas haven't been defined yet. We're looking at the existing soil data sets that we have in Ireland and working with soil scientists to see what best fits Ireland. You know, we have to be mindful, you know, it has to be accepted by DG Agri as well. I suppose in terms of, again, we're looking at the requirements that, you know, around it and what it would mean for farmers. So again, there isn't any, we haven't the requirements set out yet. I suppose what, you know, we have to be conscious that it'll aim at minimising the carbon loss from these soils. Now, just to say, like, the Commission have published a paper on this, and they did give examples of such as non-conversion of permanent grassland to arable, restrictions of ploughing, etc. So that's the kind of, you know, teams behind it. I suppose just a comment in terms of, you know, there's some research done around peatlands already, and the vast majority of peatlands used in agriculture are in permanent pasture. They're permanent grasslands. So this is the type of land use, I suppose, that, you know, we want to continue, and we don't want to change this type of management. So I suppose we'll hope to see, you know, that this GAEC won't be affecting that, and the farmers will continue to manage, you know, these type of soils in permanent pasture. Just to comment as well, I suppose that it is a new GAEC, so we're expecting some direction from the Commission on this, and they have indicated, I suppose, or they have given space for member states, and there is an option there that it should be only applicable from 2024 or 2025, and that's, I suppose, to give room for member states, you know, if they need to, you know, map these areas and define them further. So I suppose for the farmer, I suppose once we have our definitions and we have the areas mapped, you know, they will be mapped to farm level, and we'll be making the farmers aware of that and making the farmers aware of requirements. I suppose there has been comments around linking rewetting and GAEC 2. I could say, you know, that's not where we're aiming at. You know, that's a way higher standard. Like, if rewetting is to be introduced, that would be part of an AECM, and there would be no requirement around GAEC 2. In terms, I suppose, in terms of these types of lands, it might be an opportunity as well, depending on the interventions that are designed under the ECOs and AECMs for under a carbon farming team. Look, there's a few questions, Paul, that have come in under GAEC 8 as well, so I might just touch on those briefly. Can you clearly explain the proposals for GAEC 8? And then a few comments more than questions in terms of concerns around, you know, I suppose, crop rotation and a change in the crop in the parcel in every year, which was probably muted at one stage. Ted touched on this in his proposal. What Ireland is proposing is to continue with our current crop diversification rules with higher crop diversity on larger arable holdings. So the current rules, which is your 10 to 30 hectares, will, you know, continue with two crop rule. The main crop up to 75%. Then for greater than 30 hectares, a 3 crop rule again, similar requirements to we have now. The main crop up to 75, 2 crops up to 95. And again, just to point out, there is exemptions there. The current exemption of less than 10 hectares that will roll over. There is exemptions for organic farmers, etc. So look, I suppose the point is here on this is Ireland proposes to, you know, continue with the crop cut diversity. We think that offers flexibilities for Irish arable farmers, you know, in light of our climatic conditions, etc. So there was, just quickly, Paul, I'll touch on GAEC 9. There was a few questions on GAEC 9. So again, Ted pointed out that for GAEC 9, the department are proposing to go beyond, I suppose, what's in the text. You know, GAEC 9, in the text it talks about 4% for just arable farmers. The department, we're proposing to roll this out for all farmers and to provide, you know, non-productive areas or features on all farms. We think this will be fair, and we think it will meet the aspirations on biodiversity. There is targets set both in the EU biodiversity strategy and in our own agri-food strategy, which is aiming for 10% biodiversity on all farms. So look, we think, you know, this is a good thing. It will provide space for nature. It will contribute to the biodiversity of ecosystems, and also it will have climate mitigation in terms of climate mitigation. I suppose in terms of this, the arable farmers in Ireland are well aware of this. It's already there under greening, so it will be a continuation of the EFA rules as they know it. For grassland farmers, it will be a new measure where, you know, 4% of the farm has to be dedicated to non-productive features, and those non-productive features, we have a current list under our EFAs. It can be similar. You're talking about your hedgerows, your drains, your lines of trees. It could be a buffer margin, field margin, etc. So, as part of the BPS, you know, farmers will be asked to mark the areas, and it'll be quantified up to see does it meet the requirement of 4%. There is, you know, we're looking at other angles of building on this as well under ECO as well. So that's it for me, Paul. There were the questions we got in terms of conditionality.
Okay, thanks for that, David. And before I go to the next question, just again to pick up on a couple of the comments that have come in, again, just to treat as comments and ask people to follow up for us if you could. I think Eamon Corley had submitted comments in relation to the suckler cap issue, which we mentioned earlier on. Brian Traynor in relation to active farmer, which I think was covered earlier by Thomas also. I think Joseph Nolan's comments on climate change. Again, Joseph asking me maybe to follow up on that in terms of a submission to the process. Francis Burke had made some comments on BIS and active farmers, again, which I think were touched on earlier or covered earlier by Thomas. Again, Patrick Hester had made some more comments on the equine farming. Again, we'll take those on board, but again, if you could follow up with a formal submission on that to the process, it'd be much appreciated. Ben Ryan has also made a comment in relation to farm environmental rating. Again, I'd ask Ben if you could maybe follow up on that in more detail in terms of your own submission, and a couple of other issues that we covered earlier on around forgotten farmers. Daniel Devine, I think, made a comment about that, and then Dennis McGrath was just in also there with a comment on long-term leasing, which again, if you could follow up on for us, that would be very useful. I'm going to just ask if I can. We had a question earlier from Michael Gleeson. I think he was asking in relation to eco schemes and about I think opportunity for farmers to generate more income. I'm not sure just maybe specifically what the point of the question there was, Michael. So I was going to ask Michael if you could unmute your microphone and maybe just ask your question on eco schemes, and I might ask my colleague David Buckley maybe to respond and to pick up on a few other questions that we've had on eco schemes, both on the chat this evening, but also by email in the lead up to tonight's webinar. So first, Michael Gleeson, if you're there, could you unmute your microphone and put your question?
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yeah, can hear you fine, Michael, yeah.
Oh, no, I just from my reading of the new cap reform, it just seems that the new cap scheme or the greening being replaced by the eco schemes is just additional work, obviously, for less money, and I think, that's just my own view on it. So, more work for less money, as far as I can see, and that's just my view on it. Do you know?
Okay, no, thanks. I think your comment earlier on had mentioned about an opportunity to generate income, but I think earlier on I mentioned about the fact that
well, just as like if the eco scheme, like if the new eco scheme, like what I believe, like to get farmers having a positive outlook on this new scheme is that they should be getting additional BPS payments for the additional work that they carry out. Do you know, that sort of way? And I just think you'd have more buy-in from farmers if that was available to them. Do you know?
Yeah, okay, no, that's fair enough. Thanks for that point, Michael. But I might just use the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier on, I might call in my colleague David Buckley if I could. David, maybe just to give, maybe to pick up on a couple of the points that have come in on the chat, on the written questions this evening on eco schemes, but also, as I mentioned, a couple of other questions that we've had over the course of the last couple of webinars and by email today.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Paul. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so just look some of the questions. So I know Jack Cotter has just raised the question there about, and just very simply, the question is, will I qualify for the new eco scheme, or will I lose 25% of my entitlements? So look, and lots of people have touched on this already, including Ted. So the scheme is going to be open to everybody. So yes, even though people's entitlements or BPS has been cut by 25% to create the fund, our intention is to create a scheme that's open, that will be open to everybody. To touch maybe on some of Brendan Golan's point, it's open to everybody, but equally so, it's attractive to everybody. So there will be something in it for everyone to, in essence, let them get their money back, so to speak. The same gentleman, Jack Cotter, I think just in your question there at 2032, you give you an example of your own farming situation, but I think it just may well be confusing eco schemes, which is within Pillar 1, and AECMs, which are agri-environment measures, which are within Pillar 2. So just maybe to be conscious of that one. There's a question there from Donald Donovan. When will eco be paid? So it'll be paid within the year that the farmer applies for it. So it'll be towards the end of the year, something similar to this in November, December time. There's another question from Michael Walsh just on eco itself, looking for some further details on it. So I just suggest, Michael, the first place to look is, as Ted suggested, just on gov.ie. So on page 24 of the consultation document, it'll give you some details on eco first and foremost. Just touching on a point that's been raised, and David Ryan has touched on it as well, in terms of GAEC 9. So that the building on GAEC 9 as a potential eco scheme option as well, and which is set out on page 24 of the document. There's a question from Shirley Armitage just about rewarding existing extensive farming practices, and yes, we certainly intend to fully do that within eco. And once again, an example of that is set out on page 24 of the consultation document, in particular around extensive livestock production systems. Just some of the questions briefly, Paul, that have come in since yesterday evening's webinar as well. So straight question, will farmers have to join the QA scheme to participate in an eco scheme in the next CAPs? The straight answer is no. They won't have to join it. If there were a possibility that we were going to bring a QA scheme into eco, then the farmer would be getting paid for doing that. But the question is, will they have to join it? No, they won't. Question that we touched on yesterday, will woodland creation be part of an eco scheme? Not tree planting, but woodland creation. And similar and same answer obviously we had last night. The bottom line is no, there's no definitive list at this point of all the eco scheme actions that there will be. So we certainly would welcome people's views and that contributor in particular, what they envisage that measure would look like. Exact same for would the department consider rewilding, or also would the department consider an eco scheme to provide support for small scale rewetting of wetland habitat. So we'd certainly welcome people's views and in particular the detail around how they would see those actions operating. That's all the ones I have at the moment, Paul. I'll hand back to yourself.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, David. And maybe just when you mention rewetting, I was going to ask my colleague Margaret Murray maybe just come in. I know there's been a couple of queries around rewetting both before the webinars and during it, or during the webinars, just around, particularly I think we had a question around, rewetting and how, how that might impact on neighbours, for instance, if somebody's taking part in a rewetting scheme. But maybe just to explain some of the rationale behind that and the approach that the department is considering. It's mentioned in the public consultation. Margaret, would you give us just a quick update in terms of what we're thinking in that area?
Yes, hi everybody. I work in the locally led section, and one of our largest schemes is the Pearl Mussel, which kind of deals with a lot of rewetting of peatlands. Now that works on a full a catchment scale, so that will allow all of the relevant experts, such as hydrologists, to really examine what is happening within that whole catchment area. I think there is a lot of fear about rewetting, and that it will cause downstream flooding possibly. And I think that's why it's so important to kind of have the proper experts in there. But in fact, the kind of rewetting that is happening is to keep the water in the peatland areas, allowing them to get wet, allowing seasonal grazing happen, manage all of the drainage systems that are there that have been either blocked or conversely opened. So when you have rewetting, it actually allows all of the excess water to be kept in the land, and not to have surges, and therefore cause downstream flooding. So the type of rewetting that is being talked about is simply to allow the water tables in those very, very wet areas rise to its natural level, and that will contain water and allow a very, very natural seepage back into the kind of waterways again. So in fact, an awful lot of the rewetting that is being talked about is to stop flooding happen. But once again, I would emphasize that this will be done with the input of the various experts, and we will be talking to people from LawPro, from the local authorities, from the EPA catchments as well.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Margaret. And just before I go back to another couple of contributors, if I can, in a moment, there have been a couple of questions. I was hoping to bring in possibly Vincent Roddy, but I see that I don't think he has access to a microphone. I don't see a microphone there. And I think there was an earlier question on AECM also from Neely O'Sullivan, who I think also I don't see on the list there in terms of access to a microphone. So I might just pick up on the couple of points there in terms of questions on the AECM. Vincent Roddy had a question there in relation to 50,000 limit, if you like, that we're looking at, and should we not be aiming higher? But I think we're not necessarily imposing that limit. We're just assuming that that's the number of participants that we're likely to get based on experience in GLAS. But I might ask Josephine Brennan from our AECM side to maybe comment on a couple of the questions we've had around AECM, Josephine, if you wouldn't mind. For instance, on the 50,000 limit, and also more general what's envisaged in the new environmental scheme.
Thanks, Paul. So I will just go through a couple of questions that have come in on the AECM. So the first question that I look at is the one that you've mentioned about 50,000 farmers. So a specific question came in. There are currently 48,000 farmers in GLAS, and a further 11,000 applied to join REAP scheme. Yet the departments say they expect 50,000 farmers in the new AECM. So where do the other 9,000 farmers go for a scheme? So as expected, 50,000 farmers may take up the new AECM intervention, and I suppose this target is based from the current GLAS participation. Participation in the agri-environmental climate measures will be on a voluntary basis, So the eventual level of application, it'll depend on the number of factors, which includes the options being offered, whether they're appropriate or suitable for specific farmers and for their land and for their farming system, the ease of implementation of the specific measures, and I suppose the associated payment rates. At a national level, the numbers for approval into the scheme will be determined by the overall budget allocation to Ireland under the CAP, and the number and duration of the interventions and their associated budgetary requirements to be funded from that application. So I think that answers the question. Another question that came up, you state that farmers who participate will have one agri-environmental climate measure contract only. Please, a similar question I think came up last night. So I suppose just to clarify in relation to the new agri-environmental scheme, a farmer will only have one AECM contract, and I think Ted touched on this in his presentation earlier. So I suppose the new AECM scheme, it's one scheme, but it will have two elements. And even though, like, if a farmer comes into the scheme, they will have one contract, even if they choose the option for the general area or the higher priority area. Another question that has come in regarding the agri-environmental climate measure, will this be limited to the 10 hectares similar to REAP? And what priorities will be the base of the scheme? So there's no final decisions yet on the minimum area or the maximum area for individual actions in the new AECM. And again, we would welcome people's views and comments on minimum and maximum areas for specific measures. In terms of the priority areas, it'll be similar to the current agri-environmental scheme GLAS. We will have priority areas such as protection of high status watercourses, Natura areas and commonage land. A question came in relation to tree planting. So does tree planting of less than 0.1 of a hectare, as was carried out under the GLAS, currently count or contribute towards our carbon accounting or reporting procedures? And I suppose in response to this, the answer is no. The national inventory, I suppose that's under the remit of the EPA, but anything below the forestry definition of 0.1 hectare, it does not currently count or contribute towards our carbon accounting and reporting procedures. We don't have the data or the maps to pick up on a small number of trees, and the current inventory, it only picks up on the forestry. But just to say that there are research projects being currently conducted which may make it possible for the inventory to be backdated, and this would hopefully include the tree planting that occurred in GLAS. There were a number of questions that came in relation to forestry, and I think Paul had mentioned this earlier in terms of afforestation and CAP and different questions on forestry. I suppose the answer to some of those questions will be that forestry will be funded under the national programme again, and that will be separate from CAP. But just to say, even though we don't have specific forestry measures in the new AECM or in the new CAP, but we will have a strong emphasis on tree planting in the new AECM, and we have a number of measures which will be included, such as, so we've planting of trees either in groves or groups or rows. There'll be parkland planting. We also have tree planting in the riparian buffers. We also are proposing measures such as planting a traditional orchard, and we'll also have planting new hedgerows. We have one other question on forestry. It's forestry related. So how the department consider the impact the previous eco scheme GLAS had on government set afforestation targets, which are at an all-time low, and how are these being considered in the new CAP strategic plan, as there is no mention of afforestation? So the GLAS scheme, which is our current agri-environmental scheme, unlike previous agri-environmental schemes such as REPS and AOS, it's not a whole farm scheme. So afforestation was fully compatible with the GLAS scheme in that planting in areas that did not include GLAS actions was possible at any stage. And I suppose the rates of payments per hectare for forestry also compared very favourable with the rates under GLAS, and the average annual payment for GLAS is in the region of €4,100. So I think, Paul, they're most of the questions that I've seen in terms of the new AECM.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Josephine. Just to mention, I know folks have gone a little bit beyond the planned time of 9 o'clock, but we will just run on a little bit longer just to allow another few questions on a couple of other topics before we finish. So my aim will be to finish at about 9:30. If you can stay with us, we have a few other polling questions as well that we want to put to you before we finish. So if you could stay with us, that'd be very much appreciated. I'm going to just turn now to a few questions we've had in relation to gender balance, women in agriculture, and supports for women in agriculture. We've had a number of questions on that topic from a few contributors, from Kay Duffy, from Hannah Megan, Kate Hammond, and also Catherine Quinn. And I know Catherine has had her hand up there for a while as well. So I'm going to ask Catherine maybe to come in with your question or comment in relation to gender balance, if I can, please, Catherine. So you might just unmute your microphone and put your points at this point. Thanks. Catherine, I hope you can hear me okay. If you can, I think you're unmuted at our end. If you could unmute your microphone and make your points now. I'm not sure that Catherine is able to do so. I might ask, I know there was similar questions, similar points made by Kay Duffy. Kay, I wonder, are you there? Can you unmute your microphone? Either Kay or Catherine. I might just give another moment in case we can get one of you in. In fact, I'm not sure Kay is still with us. I think Catherine still is at the moment. No joy. I think Hannah Quinn Mulligan is still with us. Hannah, did you want to make your point in relation to gender balance? And I can get a response on a number of the questions that have come up maybe at the same time.
Yes, please. Thanks very much for the opportunity to put the question forward. I guess you guys have done a lot of work in your SWOT analysis in terms of recognizing the cultural bias that exists in farming. So I guess if you have any concrete ideas going forward, or if you're just at this moment still in the ideas stage yourself, it'd be welcome to hear what the department is thinking in regard to, I guess, leveling the playing field a little bit more in encouraging younger female farmers, but also acknowledging the work of women that are already farming but not recognised formally in farm partnerships. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, we're still at the ideas phase ourselves, I suppose, at the moment. We are looking at how we can, I suppose, structure our schemes in a general sense in terms of ensuring that we achieve gender balance just on the day-to-day implementation of schemes. But we're also looking at whether or not, perhaps we should have a specific intervention to encourage female participation in farming as well, or to encourage gender balance. So we are looking at that. And in fact, that is one of the questions we've put in the public consultation document, and we will ask that question as part of our polling before we finish. But I might just ask my colleague, Karina Rowe, who's coordinating on our rural development side, the various measures that are being fed into by other divisions in the department, maybe just to comment more generally about where we are, I suppose, our approach on gender balance. Karina?
Thank you, Paul. I suppose, look, it's a very important topic, I think, and it's one that now is listed in the CAP objectives, and I think other member states have a much higher representation at the female level than we do. But that's not to say, I think, as Hannah has acknowledged, the role that women play on farms. And I suppose we're looking at and we're open to ideas about how we can further recognise that, mindful that, if you are to have success, we have special measures for young farmers. We have generational renewal measures, and perhaps is a time that we should have measures for women. So I think you've touched on there, the partnership process is obviously one which provides support for women to enter into partnerships, and that is supported by the department under the Courage for Development programme. I see over the last few nights that there was some ideas coming in, and we'd welcome those. Would we have a funding bonus, for example, in initiatives that are led or partnered by women, was something that Kate Hammond had come up with tonight. So I suppose they're the kind of ideas that we're looking to hear from yourselves. I think, you know, we very much welcome the views of male and female on this, you know, to see is there something that we could do. And we know that in other member states, as I say, they have been more successful on this. But, you know, it is very much a generational issue with us, I suppose, but it's also an issue of culture, you know, that the farm is always handed on to the eldest son, or to a son at least. So, but we're seeing that changing, you know, and particularly in the organic sector, where we're seeing a lot of innovation, and that has been taken up primarily by females in that sector, in terms of the innovation and the value added of products. So I suppose that happens in a lot of farms where we have partnerships. So I suppose we'd like to see, is there something that we can do more there? There is some activity expected from the Food Vision 2030 strategy, is looking at a stakeholder event on that. But if there are views or ideas in the interim, because the CAP plan will move ahead at pace in the course of this year, we're open and very much welcome to hear those. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that, Karina. I might just move quickly to, I know there've been a couple of questions around organics as well that have been received on the board as such. I know John Fitzpatrick certainly has sent in a question. Mimi Crawford as well, Fela Malloy, a number of questions on organics, which I think colleagues have been monitoring also. So I was going to ask my colleague Seamus Barron if he could maybe pick up on a couple of those specific organics questions that have been put this evening. If you could, Seamus, please.
Yeah, that's fine, Paul. So just a few questions. One question is, are sheep included in the OFS? The simple answer is yes. Under the current OFS, there's a payment for grassland. The current payment is 170 for maintenance per hectare and 220 for in conversion. One of the conditions to achieve the payment is to maintain a stocking rate of 32.5 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare, which is a fairly extensive stocking rate. My quick calculations would indicate that that's the equivalent of 2.5 lowland ewes per hectare, or 4.5 mountain ewes per hectare, where the stocking rate, the minimum stocking rate isn't achieved, there's a pro rata payment. Okay, so that's that question. John Fitzpatrick from Laois had a question. Are organic farmers restricted? Will they be restricted from access to the AECM? The answer is no. Organic farmers get priority access to GLAS. It's envisioned that that'll be the case going forward for the new AECM. However, there are certain restrictions in terms of they're not eligible for certain measures in GLAS because of double funding issues. We're very much aware it's an issue with organic farmers. We're looking to achieve synergies between the schemes, between the new AECM and OFS, and also between the eco schemes and OFS. And there's ongoing discussions between the various divisions within the department to endeavour to achieve synergies, but we are constrained by the double funding issues. Daniel Devine, just on double funding, Daniel Devine had just sent in a question about double funding and asking why is there an issue with double funding, why are organic farmers, OFS participants precluded from REAP, and it is a double funding. Double funding isn't allowed. The payment is calculated based on income forgone and additional costs. So the organic farmer is not allowed to use chemical fertilizer. The REAP participant has can only use a maximum of 40 kg of chemical fertilizer per hectare. So there are issues there in terms of similar actions and similar outcomes, and that's where the double funding issue comes into play. But again, look, we are aware of the issues and the points that are being raised, and we are endeavouring to achieve synergies. So on these points, I'd ask people to send in written submissions, please. Just another question. I think the final question here, which had come in a little earlier, has DAFM considered organic forestation in the new OFS, for example, organic native woodland creation? So in reply to that, organic certification pertains only to food and feed, so there's no provision for organic native woodland in a new OFS. But I would like to point out the proposal that 30% of a land parcel can consist of features beneficial for climate and the environment. The example would be a grove of trees within the land parcel, and still achieve eligibility, be considered as an eligible hectare. And where it is considered an eligible hectare, it's eligible for the full OFS payment. So maybe that's good news in that respect. So I think, Paul, they're the main questions I see in front of me right now.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Seamus. And again, just conscious of the time, I wanted to just pick up on a few of the comments that have come in. Again, things that we very much appreciate people posting up on the board for us this evening. But again, I'd ask we'll treat them as comments, I think, for the moment, rather than bringing people in at this point, because the time is getting on. But there are comments there, for instance, from Francis Burke in relation to entitlements and convergence. So thanks for that. And again, if you could follow up on that as part of your submission. Declan Malloy in relation to 100% convergence, which I think was covered earlier in some of Fran's responses. A couple of comments from Imelda Walsh, I think, and Owen Donnelly around communications around the CAP strategic plan. So I think, again, for the moment, we'll note those, but again, please submit your comments around that issue as well, if you wish, as part of the submission process. Charles Burns, I think, made comments in relation to TAMS, which I think we'll note for the moment and take on board ourselves. Joe Sheridan had a response to Fran's point on regional convergence, which I think, look, we'll just note for the moment, but I think Fran has covered that regional convergence point earlier. Frank Barrett had a point about inflation being accounted for in direct payments, and just briefly, I mean, I think the calculation of what we got as far as direct payments is concerned from the EU budget negotiations over the period to 2027 includes an adjustment for inflation as well, which on a current prices, as it's called, current prices, means that we have a slight increase overall in our CAP budget between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. So there is an overall adjustment being made for inflation there as part of Ireland's allocation. And then just one final comment there, which I might ask Maria maybe to come back in on again. I know Francie Gorman has put up a couple of comments around the capping of Suckler numbers at farm level in the context of the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, I think the proposal there. And he felt that wasn't adequately addressed over the last couple of nights, I think was the gist of Francie's comments. I think, to be honest, that probably has been, Francie, addressed at this point in terms of why and what the rationale is behind that individual cap at farm level in terms of the environmental contribution we're trying to secure from the scheme. And of course, you're welcome to follow up with your own thoughts on that in terms of your submission. But I might ask Maria, maybe just briefly, before we finalise on that point and before I move on to the final set of polling questions, maybe to respond just definitively on that in case Francie hasn't picked up that earlier point, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Paul, very quickly, if I understand Francie's question correctly, and apologies if I don't, I am trying to address the questions that I'm being asked. He's asking, is the cap that's proposed at individual farm level? And yes, it is. So the scheme would restrict the individual participant from increasing and carving down more Suckler caps over the course of the contract. So there would be some tolerance level there, but it would be based on what on your reference year at the start of the contract. So there isn't an overall target for the scheme. It is actually at individual farm level. And it's not an eligibility criteria, it's more a compliance criteria. So there would be some level of tolerance, but then there would be a penalty if you didn't comply with that criteria, and that would be at individual level. Again, I would say this is a proposal in a proposed scheme. I hope that addresses the question adequately.
Okay, thanks for that, Maria. And just a couple of final things. I know there was a point made earlier on by Catherine Lascarette. I'm not sure that she's still with us. I don't see her on the list of attendees there at the moment, around assessing the cost of climate and environmental action, plus the impact on payments of convergence and CRISS before we decide on the level of payments across the various schemes. So I think I understand the point there in terms of looking at what we would set as our payment levels in terms of addressing some of the impacts across those other areas. But I think I might follow up separately maybe with Catherine on that, or get a separate submission from her on that, because I think we need to look at the payment rates across each individual scheme in accordance with, if you like, the correct payment that needs to be made to a farmer in accordance with whether that's a cost incurred income forgone or whether it's an adequate incentive in terms of achieving the objective of that measure. So look, we might follow up separately with Catherine on that, and again, I hope that she'll be able to make a submission as part of the formal exercise. I think just again, in light of the time, it's just getting on for 9:30. I mentioned that we'd call things to a close at that point. I am conscious of the fact that there are other hands up and other people want to make comments. I think I've managed to cover most of the comments and questions that came in writing. Apologies, I haven't been able to get around to everybody who had their hands up, but I tried to bring in as many people as I could to touch on the various issues that have been raised.